911, what is the address of your emergency?
I went down there and some guy was putting a blanket over her body. This guy's not moving.
This attack was violent.
It was like having my worst nightmare come true.
We start to look immediately for any surveillance cameras.
There's probably blood on his shoes.
We're in a race against time to find this person as quickly as possible.
Tony, he had a lot of love to give. Tony met his wife. They had a couple of kids, and he was a really good father. He loved spending time with them.
He was a fun dad, just kind of the kind that's, threw the kids up in the air all the time and ran outside with them.
There wasn't a kid that didn't love him. Just about every picture ever taken of them, it was always him holding the babies. That's the happiest he'd ever been.
But my brother had a hard time with his mental health, and his depression did start to get a lot more noticeable.
We tried to get him into counseling and tried to get him on meds, and he refused to do it. He said, "Mom, if I try to get that help, that means I'm gonna have to admit to myself I'm broken, and I just can't do that."
When he and his wife ended up splitting up, it was really, really hard on him.
Hi. I hope you can help. I'm looking for my son.
We had no idea where he went.
As a family, we were trying everything we could to try to find him.
We would try to, contact him through email or Messenger on Facebook, but he pretty much literally dropped off the face of the earth for us.
Every day, there's always that constant fear that something was going to happen to him.
What is the address of your emergency?
I'm on the fourth floor. I went down there and some guy was putting a blanket over her body, and it's still there. And the body never moved.
Okay, 1 second for me here.
I heard just yelling, "Stop, stop!" You guys gotta come. This guy's not moving.
All right, the officer should be arriving any minute now, okay?
The responding officers, they found the victim down on the sidewalk.
Unresponsive, get EMS rolling.
He had severe trauma to his head and face. He was having difficulty breathing.
He was identified by an ID that was in his pocket. The victim, who was James Tony Wise. Tony Wise was transferred to the hospital. Arrived around 7:30 in the morning. At this time, officers had the scene taped off, trying to separate witnesses and preserving the crime scene.
When we arrived, we filmed crime scenes to capture and document the evidence.
There was an opening to a fence to a parking lot. That's where Tony Wise was located.
This must be where the assault took place.
There was a pool of blood. I saw some other items that were kind of strewed upon the ground. There was a metal scooter, pink pepper spray. There was a tent that was kind of smashed down to the ground.
Did you know Tony Wise? Okay.
We had spoken to a witness out at the scene. who told us they were familiar with Tony Weiss. That witness identified his tent and said that he had been in that area for some time.
Take this out over here.
We were able to see that there were shoe impressions on the tent that appeared to be in blood.
If we could locate that shoe, that was potentially going to be a key piece of evidence for us down the road.
It definitely stood out as something that was a pretty violent attack. We were wondering what could have been the motive to what happened.
Detectives contact Marcus Dayton, the 911 caller who witnessed the attack from his apartment.
This is Detective Green there with the Portland Police Bureau. Thanks for taking my call. So if you can just kind of start from the beginning, you were in your residence there?
It's 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'm on that side of the street, my window.
Marcus Dayton looked down to the street below his unit, out to 3rd Avenue.
And all of a sudden, I see this guy, like, lifting himself off the fence and then coming down with his leg, stomping on something.
He sees the suspect hitting and kicking what he thought initially was maybe a bag of trash, but this person was using the fence and stomping another person's head extremely violently.
The guy that you see, let's describe him.
Let's say about 5'10", 5'11".
How much does he weigh?
170, 180 pounds.
He gave a very good description of the clothing that was unique.
He had light hats on, and he had a black sweatshirt, jogging shirt, and it had red markings on either side.
He also described him as having white shoes.
There's probably blood on his shoe from stomping the guy's head to the fucking ground.
After the assault ended, he observed the suspect walking southbound on Northwest 3rd Avenue, where he loses sight of the suspect. This person was definitely a danger to the public, and we needed to locate and arrest this person as soon as we can.
Investigators enlist forensic evidence technician Mark Weber to find cameras that might show the attack.
I went to the ODOT building, Oregon Department of Transportation, to get video. They have a lot of exterior cameras that help cover the streets in that area. The building itself is 1 block directly east of the crime scene. There was one camera angle on the ODOT building that pointed straight across that parking lot, right in the area where Tony's tent was. I was hoping they could show the crime scene and show the attack.
Officer Weber brings the footage to the police bureau for analysis.
Let's see what we got.
This view, which covers this entire parking lot, but it's so far away, you're gonna watch it as carefully as you can.
This looks like the area where Mr. Wise was attacked. Let's go to 4 a.m. just before the 911 call.
So looking at the frame, I'm really focusing right around Mr. Wise's tent in the area where I know the pool of blood was located.
Wait, who's that?
I see a figure walk towards the direction of where Mr. Wise's tent was. And then I also see another figure also come into frame as well. And it looks like then the two figures kind of interact.
Something's happening.
It looked like there was a physical altercation that occurred between the two persons. And at one point in time, a person is knocked to the ground. The suspect continued to kick and punch while the victim was on the ground. Unfortunately, now there's a tree that kind of blocks some of the view.
Replay it.
The 911 caller describes this subject to be wearing lighter colored pants and a darker colored top.
There's light pants. That's gotta be our suspect.
And that's Tony Wise.
The video shows the interaction between the suspect and the victim, and it actually kind of seconds what we heard from witnesses.
It looks like the altercation happens rather quickly. You could tell the fight was a violent fight just based on the person getting knocked down. It appeared that there was only two people involved. The biggest drawback about this camera was that it was from far away. It was hard to positively ID the people.
Investigators search for surveillance cameras that are closer to the crime scene.
We should be able to find them on other video for the projected time of our homicide.
The attack happened in front of the Blanchet house. There's one camera on the building pointing north. And there was one camera pointing south.
Investigators analyze the footage from both cameras.
All right, can you start about half hour for the first 911 call?
The camera angle that we're observing here is facing to the south. To the left is the parking lot that's fenced off, and you only capture the top portion of that.
Zoom in.
We start watching the video at approximately 3:50 a.m. We notice where Mr. Weiss's tent is, that portion is not captured in this camera frame.
But we were hoping that this camera might have captured maybe our suspect coming to the scene.
Wait. Who's that? Who's that?
At approximately 3:56, 20 minutes prior to this incident being called into the police, we observed a subject on the sidewalk.
It does look like he was kind of loitering.
Freeze it there. Zoom in on him.
It's difficult to make out facial characteristics of the person, but he's wearing lighter pants and what appear to be white shoes, which is consistent with the description Marcus Dayton provided us.
Let's try the north camera. A minute or two beforehand, see where he came from.
There was another camera angle that faced right at the intersection of 3rd and Gleason.
Play that again. Zoom in on him. Freeze it there.
3:55 a.m. on the north camera, we observed the subject that we had seen on the south camera.
That's gotta be him.
You could tell that the jacket the person's wearing is a two-tone jacket. That kind of gives him away.
This was a big moment because we're seeing some corroboration on video that kind of matches what our 911 caller is describing.
We didn't get a good shot of his face. This was during COVID, so he was wearing a face mask at the time.
Okay, keep playing.
We see the suspect. He speaks with someone at the northwest corner of the intersection at Gleason and 3rd Avenue.
Then I can see our suspect walking back southbound towards the direction of our scene,
putting him directly in the path of Mr. Weiss's tent, which is just off camera.
We still don't know who our suspect is, but we have a better idea of his movement throughout the scene to start looking at different cameras in the area.
Detective Clifton. Okay, I see. Okay, thank you. Bye. That was the hospital. It looks like he's not going to make it.
We're notified that Mr. Weiss is not going to survive his injuries.
It was severe skull fractures that Tony Wise received.
That's his mother's number.
Hello?
I kind of knew right then, before he went any further, that it was something about my son. And it was like having my worst nightmare come true.
Where is he? Okay, thank you.
I needed to be with him to say goodbye as good as I could. When I saw him, I just kept telling him over and over, I love you, son. I love you so much. But he couldn't hear it. At least, I was able to hold his hand and tell him goodbye, and I would see him in another life.
Tony dies from his injuries the following day.
It turns into a homicide investigation at that point. We want to bring justice to the family and know that this person's being held accountable for their actions. Detective Greenlee and I are on scene getting briefings from the responding officers. We learn that another assault had occurred earlier in the morning.
So there was another assault just around the corner.
What?
Yeah.
The officer tells investigators that the assault happened around 2:55 a.m., 80 minutes before the attack on Tony Wise.
And it was a block across from where Mr. Weiss had been assaulted.
We don't know if they were connected, but it was definitely odd. It was very similar to the attack on Mr. Wise.
A witness called 911 to report the incident.
911, what is the address of the emergency? I am right in front of the Chinese Garden downtown. There's this man that was really brutally beat up, and he's passed out on the side of his car, and he's really bloody. I don't think he's conscious. What's the color and type of vehicle? It's a white Mercedes-Benz.
What stood out to us was the witnesses describing the suspect also kind of kicking and stomping the victim, and the victim also had severe injuries to his face.
The victim of the assault is Tembelani Deniso.
How many people assaulted him? It was like 2 guys.
What about the victim?
I learned from Officer Garth that he interviewed the victim, Mr. Deniso, at the hospital.
He couldn't remember any of it.
He was unable to provide much of a statement as to what occurred because of the head injury.
The Mercedes-Benz was currently still located at the scene. So we take a look. We saw a significant amount of blood on the vehicle.
Some of our criminalists document the scene in photographs and collect blood evidence as well.
With Tony Wise and another victim, Mr. Deniso, the similarities stood out. But we just didn't have much information on what could have been the motive connecting these 2 incidents. Tony Wise was homeless, and now we have another victim with a vehicle, a Mercedes-Benz.
You have a person just randomly assaulting and attacking people downtown. It's very unusual. We'd start looking for surveillance video cameras in that area that we can capture this assault and see if it matches up with the suspect that we had seen at the Blanchet house. Right at the corner there is the Trailhead Credit Union. We observed the credit union there to have an exterior surveillance camera that we believe captures that intersection and ultimately that first assault.
Investigators review the footage back at the police bureau.
Can you go to 2:30 a.m., see if we can spot the vehicle?
We're looking for a white Mercedes. There's a lot of lighting there, so you can see everything in color. The video doesn't come out grainy.
There was a good camera that picked up the intersection. I'm really looking, can I place Mr. Deniso's vehicle there?
There, that's it.
At 2:42 hours on the camera, we observed Deniso's white Mercedes driving northbound on Northwest 2nd Avenue.
You can see the brake lights illuminate and pull along the west curb line. So I'm just trying to understand what led up to this assault that took place at the vehicle.
Who's that?
At about 2:53 hours, I see a person walking, kind of looking at his phone, and he's walking northbound towards the direction of Mr. Deniso's vehicle.
Hang on, who's this? Freeze a bit.
The person walking behind is wearing a kind of a darker shirt, but his pants were of a light color, and then wearing white shoes. And that stood out to me. But it also looked like he was carrying an object in his hand that looked like a jacket.
Zoom in on that.
As they walked towards the vehicle, I could see it almost looked like the door was ajar at one point.
It's so far away, you can't see clearly what exactly happens. You can see movement, The one gentleman's white pants, you can see it moving, but you can't really tell what's going on.
We're really looking closely. It looks like there's a physical disturbance, the fight that happens at the vehicle.
That must be the assault. Keep playing it?
They come walking back, facing the cameras with nice bright lights. We get to see everything as they're walking toward us.
Look, he's wearing the jacket.
That's our man.
Looking at what he's wearing, a jacket with the leather along the sides, it was consistent to the attack on Mr. Wise. So I believe this was the same person.
The one gentleman was wearing a mask. We can't really see his face.
Please sit there. Can you zoom in on the shoes?
You can see blood on his shoes. You can very plainly see it.
I believe this was blood that was from the attack with Mr. Deniso.
This is definitely our guy.
So we have our suspect at 2:59. It's within just a few blocks and an hour and a half before Mr. Weiss is assaulted. And when they walk off to the south, this was also the same direction where Tony Weiss had been murdered.
But there wasn't a clear connection between both the attacks, so we didn't have a clear motive at this time.
Zoom in on the other guy.
This other person that's with our suspect, he's a high priority for us as well at this point to identify.
As officers search for the suspects, investigators meet with Tony's family.
The detective in charge was really nice. He seemed to really care if they found out who did it, which surprised me because a lot of times when somebody's homeless, they don't seem to get any attention.
Can you think of anyone who might have done this to Tony?
Tony's family had no idea who this person is that committed this offense.
We just try to get an understanding of what prompted this attack, kind of the motive behind it.
I want to assure you that we're doing everything we can to find who did this. If you know anything, we'll let you know.
Investigators review additional footage from the Trailhead Credit Union. They trace the suspect's movements following the attack on Mr. Deniso.
At the entrance to the credit union, there's a recessed alcove area where there's a camera.
There he is.
About 3:42, I observed our suspect. He was no longer with the male observed previous with the attack on Mr. Deniso. He was walking towards the ATM machine.
So I bring up that camera.
And I see a white female kind of wearing a pinkish color jacket, almost like a kind of plastic shower cap on her head, and an unknown male. I then see our suspect come into the frame of the ATM.
It's nice and clean and crisp, and it lets us see our suspect in full light.
You can really get a clear image of kind of the t-shirt that he's wearing underneath, the jacket, and that he's wearing glasses. We see that they're both interacting like they know each other.
What are they doing?
Seems like they're pushing, trying to get money out of the machine.
At one point, it looks like the female gets frustrated. Oh. Then also a moment that the suspect looks like he gets frustrated at the machine as well, and he punches the machine. When he punches the ATM, it seems like he punched the ATM with a lot of force. And you could tell that something disturbed him or angered him at this point.
This is maybe 15 minutes before the actual homicide attack at Tony's tent. Is this guy gonna strike somewhere else? We're in a race against time to find this person as quickly as possible.
Looking at the video that we obtained from the Trail Credit Union, that was probably our clearest image that we had of the suspect. So I did a screen capture, and then I distributed that through police channels, see if they recognized the person as well.
Meanwhile, Connie searches for someone who can tell her about Tony's last days.
The police told me where he had been staying. I wanted so badly to know what was going on with him. Did they know if he was trying to get back in touch with his family?
Did you know my son Tony was? No.
There was somebody that worked at the shelter, and there was a handwritten note in there that said, "Thank you for being who you are. I really appreciate you. You're a good person, and you're my angel." They said it was from one of the other homeless people that they had given to Tony. Tony was living in a shelter and he had a job in there. He cared a lot for the people out there. It wouldn't surprise me a bit if somebody just really appreciated him. I would have given anything to have him back.
Investigators traced the suspect's movements after Tony Wise's murder.
Start a little after 4 a.m.
The suspect headed south after he attacked Tony. Detectives review surveillance camera footage from the likely route he walked.
There he is.
I see our suspect walking along Northwest 1st Avenue to a staircase which will lead up to West Burnside Street.
Freeze it there. Zoom in. His shoes.
You can see the blood on his shoes. It's the same person.
Keep playing.
Then I can see him walking up the staircase.
Bring up the camera in West Burnside.
So then I look at additional cameras that captured West Burnside Street.
There he is.
And I observed the suspect then walk westbound towards the direction of the shoreline.
The shoreline is transitional housing for people that have been released recently from prison.
He appears to enter the front entrance of the shoreline.
I was just like, holy cow, I know where this guy lives.
Investigators send images of the suspect to local parole officers to see if they recognize him.
And we received a call from Multnomah County Probation Officer Paula Feda, who explained to us that she recognized the person as being Elijah Williams.
Yeah. What can you tell me about Elijah?
She explains to us that Elijah Williams was incarcerated for a period of time for sexual assault on a minor, and that he's now living at the Shoreline as kind of a transitional housing upon being released.
It all made sense. The Shoreline is literally 5 blocks from where Tony Weiss was murdered. On February 19th, we established surveillance at the Shoreline. Our plan was to locate Mr. Williams away from the apartment, take him into custody safely, and execute the search warrant at his residence. One of our detectives observed Mr. Williams leave the Shoreline. He got on a TriMet bus. And we followed him. And once he was in a position that was safe, we took him into custody. Now we need to understand why this thing happened. We entered Elijah Williams' apartment and we recovered this jacket. We recovered the pants. We recovered the glasses.
We also saw a pair of white shoes. This was very important evidence because we knew now that we had the shoes that were used during the assault. They matched the impressions observed previously on the tent.
DNA confirmation determined that Tony Weiss's DNA was on the shoes. Luminol revealed that there was blood on the carpet at the entryway of Elijah Williams' room. They used luminol on the bathroom sink as well. We're 100% confident that we've got the right guy, that he's the person that's murdered Tony Weiss. Inside the apartment, we located what we believe to be steroids. You hear the phrase roid rage or things of that nature. That might have factored into why he acted the way he did. Elijah Williams is transported back to the Detective Division, downtown Portland.
First, detectives ask Williams about the assault on Mr. Deniso.
There was a fight. Someone called it in. Early morning hours on the 13th.
I was actually one of the ones that was assaulted.
You were one of the ones that was assaulted? What happened?
A guy stole my friend's phone. And we confronted him about it, and he started attacking me. I did hit him back.
You hit him back?
I did.
He described that he was more the victim of the attack. But that was kind of the first win in the interview of just placing there on scene. Looking at the video after the attack of Mr. Deniso, see red blood on his shoes, so I don't believe that he was a victim.
And what friend was it that you were with to go confront this guy to get the phone back?
My friend Bear.
Bear?
He lays out a story where he claims that he's with his friend. We were never able to identify who this person Bear was. We start speaking with Elijah Williams about Tony Weiss, the attack on him.
There was a fight outside of the Blanchet house.
Yeah, I've seen the area before in the parking lot, but I've never actually been by the Blanchet house.
At this point during the interview, he details stuff that we know is not true. The surveillance video puts him at the Blanchet house.
You can't really argue over it. The video proves the case.
Video has put you at the fight. What happened when you got over there?
I was being loud or whatever. Some dude told me to shut the up. He came out with some pepper spray and just started hosing me down. And then that's when I ran over to try to go grab it out of his hand. He grabbed me by my throat. and grabbed my jacket. And so I tried to like wrestle him for it, and then I threw him on the ground, started kicking him.
Elijah Williams, he ultimately admits his involvement. And we talked to him about the injuries, the significant damage, and just the pure violence of what the assault had done to Tony Weiss.
The male that I showed you in that picture, when he was taken to the hospital, he was treated for very serious injuries.
But he passed away. And so we can't change that.
Don't say that. Don't say that.
He ultimately regretted what he had done. It's easy to walk away from Tony Weiss, to not recognize him as a person, as a human being, because he was a homeless person.
Williams is charged with second-degree murder for killing Tony Wise and second-degree assault for the attack on Tembelani Deniso.
We were able to rule out Bear as having any involvement in the Tony Weiss murder and Deniso assault. We were also able to rule out the female at the ATM as having any involvement in the Tony Weiss murder.
Prosecutors pieced together what happened on the early morning of February 13th.
Elijah Williams, he was taking his testosterone, his steroids, drinking heavily, and decided to go out. He was at a club with a friend, and a friend's phone had been stolen.
Williams tells police that Deniso stole the phone. Williams and Bear catch up with Deniso later in the evening.
Mr. Williams brutally beat Deniso and then left him.
There is no evidence that Deniso stole any property from Williams or his friend Bear.
Elijah Williams encountered some friends, including a woman. When the suspect punches the bank machine, he looks angry and then walked off in the direction where Tony had been living. He was being loud, and Tony had told him to be quiet. They'd exchanged words, and things quickly escalated. He started stomping Tony's head and beating Tony till the point that Tony was no longer conscious. Then left the Blanchet House area, slowly made his way back to his residence. He had been drinking alcohol with the steroids that resulted in him just flying into a rage and doing what he did unprovoked without any further real explanation for it. Tony was a decent guy, and certainly no one deserved what happened to him.
Elijah Williams pleads guilty to the lesser charge of manslaughter in the first degree for the killing of Tony Wise. He also pleads guilty to attempted assault in the second degree for the attack on Tembelani Deniso. The judge sentences him to 17 years in prison.
I am glad that that person is going to be in jail for a long time. I hope he doesn't get out, because I would be fearful for anybody that would be near him.
I hear a lot of people say there is no such thing as closure, but I actually think I did feel some, just because they were able to find the killer and he was brought to justice.
This surveillance video was absolutely crucial in this investigation to solve the case.
Without the video, they probably would have never found the suspect.
The harbor city of Sydney, a place of blinding sunlight and glistening blue waters, hid a suffocating secret beneath its polished surface in the sweltering summer of 2005. It started as a routine disappearance, the kind that usually resolves itself within 48 hours. But for Sarah Jenkins, the vibrant 24-year-old architectural student, the clock stopped forever on a Tuesday evening in November. She had vanished from the steps of a bustling inner-city train station, captured for the final time on grainy, flickering security footage that showed her checking her watch, glancing toward the shadows of a nearby alley, and then stepping into a void from which she would not emerge for 2 decades. The city was paralyzed by the suddenness of it, a shock wave that rippled through the suburbs and left a community clutching at the edges of a mystery that seemed to defy the basic laws of physical evidence. When the initial search turned up nothing, no blood, no broken glass, no struggle, just the abandoned remains of her backpack left meticulously organized on a nearby bench, the police knew they were dealing with something far more calculated than a random act of street violence. The backpack contained her phone, her wallet, and her sketches, but her keys were missing, a tiny, chilling detail that suggested she had not been dragged away, but had perhaps been coerced or had stepped into the dark of her own volition, guided by a hand she trusted implicitly. The investigation that followed was a masterclass in frustration, as detectives combed through every inch of the station, interviewed every commuter who had passed through that night, and scrutinized the lives of every person Sarah had ever known, only to find a tapestry of lies, alibis that felt too rehearsed, and a silence that felt heavier with every passing day. The silence wasn't just a lack of information, it was a physical weight that pressed down on the investigation, a collective refusal to look behind the curtain of Sarah's perfectly curated life. She was the golden girl of her architecture firm, a prodigy with a future that promised to reshape the Sydney skyline, but as the police peeled back the layers of her professional and personal circles, they discovered a labyrinth of professional jealousy and illicit affairs that transformed the case from a missing person report into a high-stakes investigation of systemic betrayal. Every lead led to a cul-de-sac of half-truths, and every witness seemed to have something to hide, whether it was their own questionable behavior or a desperate need to protect the reputation of the firm that Sarah had called home. For years, the case remained in the cold case vault of the New South Wales Police, a haunting, open-ended sentence that kept the detectives awake, their eyes burning from staring at the same grainy footage, their minds running through the same circular logic of who had the access, who had the motive, and who had the cruelty to erase someone so thoroughly from the world. The city moved on. Skyscrapers rose to obscure the view of the station where she was last seen, and the public's obsession shifted. But for the investigators, the memory of that Tuesday night remained a jagged, open wound, a test of their endurance that refused to heal. Then came the digital breakthrough, a forensic miracle that was the result of 2 decades of technological evolution, as a new investigative team decided to re-examine the digital debris of 2005, the recovered hard drives, the forgotten emails, and the fragmented server logs that had been written off as useless in the days of dial-up. They found a hidden file, a secure folder buried deep in the server of the architecture firm, which contained not just architectural blueprints, but a timeline of Sarah's personal movements, logged with an obsessive, mathematical precision that defied all reasonable explanation. It was a digital map of a stalking campaign, executed by someone who didn't just have access to her professional life, but who had turned his role as a mentor into the perfect camouflage for a predator who operated in the daylight. The discovery was a detonation, a revelation that brought the entire structure of her firm crashing down and pointed the finger of blame directly at the man who had delivered the most moving eulogy at her memorial service. The investigation pivoted with a speed that startled the media as the police executed a series of raids on the homes and offices of the firm's partners, looking for the physical evidence that would confirm what the digital trail had only hinted at. They found it in the crawl space of a summer home on the outskirts of the Blue Mountains, a small, unassuming metal canister that had survived the fires and the floods, holding the physical key to Sarah's disappearance, a spare set of office keys, etched with her name, that had been stolen weeks before she vanished. It was the confirmation of the betrayal, the final piece of the puzzle that turned a cold, unsolvable mystery into a vivid, horrifying portrait of a man who had used his position of power to stalk, secure, and ultimately silence the woman he had claimed to be helping. As the news of the arrest spread through Sydney, the shock was not just that a killer had been found, but that he had been standing in front of them the entire time, participating in the investigation, attending the vigils, and playing the part of the grieving friend while he kept the secret of his crime locked away in the shadows of the mountains. The trial that followed was a theater of the macabre, with the prosecution revealing the depth of the betrayal, how he had manipulated the security systems, how he had tracked her through her own phone, and how he had used his reputation as a pillar of the architecture industry to make sure that no one would ever suspect him. Every day in court was a gut punch for the community, as the details of the stalking came to light, showing how he had meticulously planned for Sarah to disappear during a moment of professional vulnerability, leaving the police to chase shadows while he went about his life, secure in the knowledge that his carefully maintained mask would never slip. The defense attempted to argue that the digital evidence was circumstantial, that the keys were a plant, and that the prosecution was creating a narrative to satisfy the public's thirst for closure, but the weight of the testimony from the unexpected witness, a former colleague who had been forced into silence by threats, shattered every argument they built. The witness spoke of the night of the disappearance, describing the way the suspect had looked when he returned to the office, his eyes vacant, his clothes smelling of the earth and the rain, and the way he had warned her never to mention that she had seen him. It was the end of the line, the moment where the years of calculated, cold-blooded deception finally hit the wall of reality. When the verdict of guilty was read, the courtroom didn't erupt. It collapsed into a stunned, collective silence, a release of breath that had been held for 20 years. The killer remained motionless, his face a mask of calculated indifference, but as he was led from the room, he couldn't hide the twitch in his jaw, the one sign that the reality of his prison sentence had finally breached his defenses. The community felt a strange, shifting sense of vertigo, as if the ground they had been standing on for 2 decades had been completely rearranged. The case that had been their obsession, their cautionary tale, their open-ended tragedy was finally closed, leaving behind not just the satisfaction of justice, but a haunting, lingering question about how many other monsters were hiding in plain sight, protected by the very reputations that we all chose to trust. The aftermath of the trial left Sydney forever changed, with the architecture firm closing its doors in disgrace, and the building itself being torn down to make way for a park that would eventually carry Sarah's name. The memory of the 2005 case became a part of the city's civic architecture. Reminder that the most dangerous secrets are the ones we carry in our own circles, the ones that are hidden behind the walls of our workplaces, our homes, and our communities. For the detectives who had chased this ghost, the resolution was a complex, hollow victory. They had caught the killer, but they had also learned the terrifying truth about the limits of their own perception. They were left to wonder, in the quiet of their offices, how many more stories were currently being written by men who, like the architect of Sarah's demise, were hiding in the light of day, waiting for the right moment to make someone disappear. The legacy of the Sarah Jenkins case is now a foundational part of Sydney's cold case lore, a story that is told in every police training manual and every journalism class, not as a story about a killer, but as a story about the fragility of our own perception. It taught the city that justice is not something we wait for. It is something we fight for, piece by piece, digital fragment by digital fragment, until the wall of silence finally crumbles. The harbor city is still beautiful. The sun still hits the water with the same brilliant intensity. But for those who remember 2005, the horizon is a little different, a little more guarded, and deeply, irrevocably aware of the shadows that can grow even in the brightest of places. The case is closed, the mystery is gone, and the betrayal has been exposed. But the shadow that Sarah Jenkins cast remains, a reminder of the life that should have been, and the truth that finally, after 2 agonizing decades, found its way into the light. As we look back on the timeline of the investigation, it's impossible to ignore the role of the modern era in solving the past, a reminder that in the world of cold cases, time is not always the enemy. Sometimes, it's the only way to catch the truth. The digital forensic revolution was the hero of the story, a set of tools that didn't exist when Sarah first vanished, but that would eventually become the key that turned the lock. It's a testament to the fact that we should never stop looking, never stop processing, and never stop believing that the truth, no matter how deeply it's buried in the static of history, is always there, waiting for the technology to catch up. The detectives of 2005 were limited by the tools of their time, but the detectives of today have a clarity they could never have dreamed of, and in that, we find a renewed sense of hope for every other family who is still waiting for their own moment of revelation. The story ends not with a celebration, but with a quiet, solemn reflection on the necessity of the fight, the value of the wait, and the absolute power of the truth to eventually find its way home. Sarah Jenkins was just a student with a sketchpad, but her story has become the bedrock of a city's conscience, a permanent part of the Sydney skyline that will never be erased. The cold case is solved, the architect of her destruction is behind bars, and the city, in all its complexity, has learned the most difficult lesson of all, that silence is not just a lack of words, it is the very armor that allows the shadows to thrive, and the only way to defeat it is to be the voice that refuses to look away, the force that refuses to stop asking, and the conscience that refuses to be silenced by the weight of time, the pressure of power, or the arrogance of those who think they can hide in the light. The investigation into Sarah Jenkins' disappearance, following the initial shock, quickly spiraled into a claustrophobic maze of institutional resistance and personal deception. As the detectives began to map the final hours of her life, they were met not with the cooperative spirit of a concerned workplace, but with a cold, calculated defensive posture of a high-end corporate entity. The architecture firm where Sarah worked, located in the heart of Sydney's bustling CBD, was a glass and steel monument to success, a place where image was everything and anything that threatened that image was treated with the surgical precision of a PR crisis management team. When the police requested access to the firm's internal communications, they were greeted by high-priced legal counsel who insisted that Sarah's disappearance was a private matter, unrelated to her professional life. It was the first significant warning sign that the detectives were fighting against more than just a killer. They were fighting against a culture of elitism that viewed the life of a junior employee as a liability to be contained rather than a tragedy to be solved. The internal investigation of the firm, conducted with extreme caution, revealed that Sarah had been working on a project that was significantly ahead of her experience level, a high-stakes design proposal for a government contract that had brought her into direct contact with the senior partners. When the detectives pulled the records of this project, they found an alarming pattern of unauthorized access to Sarah's computer files, occurring during the hours of midnight to dawn, times when she was supposedly at home. The digital trail was faint, obscured by proxy servers and encrypted tunnels that suggested the person doing the accessing was not just technically proficient, but was actively trying to cover their tracks. It was a digital fingerprint that pointed toward someone within the inner circle, someone who knew how the firm's infrastructure worked and who had the authority to bypass the standard security protocols. As the weeks turned into months, the detectives expanded their gaze to include the senior partners of the firm, treating them as potential persons of interest in a way that caused a massive professional backlash. The media began to pick up on the tension, painting the investigation as a class conflict between the working-class police force and the elite, untouchable architects of Sydney's skyline. This public narrative only served to harden the resolve of the firm's management, who used every avenue at their disposal to discredit the detectives and steer the focus away from their own internal affairs. The case began to feel like a siege, with the detectives trying to penetrate a fortress of influence, money, and social prestige, all while Sarah Jenkins, the woman at the center of it all, continued to be treated as a secondary concern to the reputation of the firm she had served with such dedication. It was during this period of intense scrutiny that the detectives uncovered the hidden life Sarah had been leading, a life she had shielded from her professional world. They found a private journal in her apartment, a small, unassuming notebook that she had tucked away in a hollowed-out book on her bookshelf. It was a document that would change the entire trajectory of the investigation. In it, Sarah detailed a climate of professional intimidation, describing how her mentor, the lead architect on the government project, had been monitoring her movements, checking her personal emails, and making unwelcome advances that she had been terrified to report for fear of losing her career. It was the missing piece of the mosaic, the motive that the detectives had been grasping for in the dark. It wasn't about a random act of street violence. It was about the misuse of power, the silent, creeping encroachment of a predator who had positioned himself as her guide and then turned that position into a cage. The mentor, a man named Marcus Thorne, was a luminary in the Australian architecture scene, a man whose public persona was one of enlightened mentorship and creative genius. When the detectives confronted him with the journal, his transformation was chilling. He didn't stutter or show remorse. He offered a polished, rehearsed defense, questioning the authenticity of the notebook and implying that Sarah had been prone to professional instability. It was a maneuver so practiced and so cruel that it left the detectives in a state of righteous, cold fury. They realized then that they weren't dealing with a panicked killer who had made a mistake. They were dealing with a sociopath who had spent his entire career honing the art of manipulation. Thorne was not just a suspect. He was the primary antagonist in a drama he had been writing for years, and he was absolutely certain that he would be the one to determine the ending. The investigation then became a war of attrition. The detectives had to prove, without a shred of doubt, that the digital trail in the firm's server was Thorne's, and that his alibi for the night of the disappearance, a charity gala he had supposedly attended, was a fabrication. They spent countless hours cross-referencing cell tower data, bank statements, and witness testimonies, trying to build a case that would pierce his impenetrable reputation. It was a grueling task, complicated by the fact that Thorne had essentially spent his life building a life of public credit that could be used as a shield against any accusation. Every time the police got close, Thorne's legal team would introduce a new layer of complexity, a new witness who could vouch for his character, or a technical objection that would delay the process for weeks. The case was turning into a test of the justice system's ability to treat an elite professional with the same scrutiny as a common criminal, a test that the Sydney police force was determined not to fail. Throughout this period, Sarah Jenkins' family remained the emotional center of the case, their grief being continuously reopened by the media's treatment of Sarah as a personality type, rather than a person. They held press conferences where they begged for the truth, their faces showing the raw, unvarnished toll of 20 years of not knowing. They were the ones who kept the flame of the investigation alive, refusing to let the media or the police or the public look away from the reality of her loss. They were a testament to the fact that justice is not just a legal process, it is a moral obligation, a duty to the dead that the living must fulfill, no matter how long the road or how powerful the adversary. As the detectives delved deeper into Thorne's history, they began to find others who had worked with him, colleagues, interns, former employees, who had similar stories of professional intimidation and unexplained dismissals. The picture of Thorne's personality began to emerge not just as a killer, but as a systematic predator who had used the architecture industry as his hunting ground, moving from one success to the next, leaving behind a trail of damaged careers and silenced voices. The detectives realized that if they didn't catch him now, he would simply move on to the next project, the next city, the next victim. The urgency was palpable. They weren't just solving a cold case anymore. They were proactively preventing a new one. The digital forensic work intensified, with the team bringing in cybersecurity experts who were capable of deconstructing the firm's server protocols. They found that Thorne had been using a private, backdoor access point, a digital secret door he had installed when he first joined the firm. It was a masterstroke of predatory planning, allowing him to monitor any employee he chose without leaving a trace on the main network. The detectives sat in a room filled with flickering monitors, watching the data stream in, and for the first time, they felt the pieces of the puzzle truly coming together. It wasn't just a matter of finding the evidence. It was about unmasking the infrastructure that had enabled him to act with such impunity. The atmosphere at the 3rd District Precinct became one of controlled, high-intensity focus. They knew they were on the cusp of an arrest that would shake the foundations of Sydney's elite. They were preparing not just for an arrest, but for a public reckoning. They had the digital footprints, they had the motive, and they were closing in on the physical evidence that would be the final seal of his guilt. The case that had been a source of such profound frustration for so long was finally, inevitably, reaching its peak. Every day, the detectives would arrive at the office with a sense of purpose that was electrifying. They were no longer just observers. They were the catalysts for a reckoning that had been decades in the making. As the final steps were put into place, the detectives found themselves reflecting on the nature of their work. They realized that the Sarah Jenkins case was a mirror for the city itself, a place of such beauty and light, but one that was built on the same foundations of power and privilege that had protected Thorne for so long. They were challenging the idea that someone could be too big to fail or too important to be a suspect. They were doing it not just for Sarah, but for every person who had been silenced by the powerful, every person who had been told their life didn't matter as much as a career, and every person who believed that justice was a luxury they couldn't afford. They were, in the most literal sense, reclaiming the integrity of their city. The night before the final warrants were executed, the city of Sydney felt strangely still. The lights of the harbor reflected off the water in a way that felt almost ominous, a reminder of the darkness that lay beneath the surface of everything. The detectives spent the night in the office, reviewing the files one last time, checking the timestamps, and making sure every procedural requirement had been met. It was a quiet, intense atmosphere, the sound of their breath and the soft hum of the computers filling the room. They were ready. They had chased the shadow for 20 years, and now they were prepared to bring it into the light. The morning would bring the end of the mystery, the start of the trial, and the beginning of a new chapter for the city that would never be the same again. As the sun began to rise over the Sydney Opera House, the detectives moved out into the city, their faces set in grim, determined lines. They were the ones who would carry the weight of this day, the ones who would ensure that the truth was finally spoken, and the ones who would bring Sarah Jenkins back to the center of the story where she belonged. They had reached the point of no return, the threshold of a truth that could no longer be contained. The case was about to be solved, and in the solving of it, they were about to tear down the house that Elias Thorne had built on a foundation of blood and lies. The morning was not just a start, it was a final, absolute reclamation of the future. The arrest was conducted with a surgical, quiet efficiency. When they arrived at Thorne's penthouse, he was sitting in his study, looking out over the harbor, his demeanor as composed and arrogant as ever. But as the detectives approached, Thorne seemed to understand that the game was over. He didn't speak, he didn't offer a defense, he simply looked at the handcuffs, then at the detectives, and then back at the city he had so carefully manipulated. It was the end of the mask, the collapse of the persona, the final, undeniable proof that the shadow had been caught. As he was led away, the silence that had followed the city for 20 years was finally broken by the sound of the law, the sound of the truth, and the sound of a city beginning to reclaim its own, long-lost soul. The journey from the disappearance to this morning had been a brutal, testing road, but it had been a road that had led to the only place that ever truly mattered. The detectives had seen the town through the long, freezing night of the cold case, and they were leaving it in the light of a new, more aware morning. They knew that the world was still a place where shadows existed, where predators still hunted, and where the truth still required constant, vigilant care. But they also knew that they had done their part, that they had helped to build a foundation of justice that would be stronger, more resilient, and more enduring than the darkness they had fought for so long. The case was about to be solved, the mystery was over, and the story of the Sarah Jenkins case had finally, at long last, been brought into the light of day. The silence that had once protected the predator was now the silence that would witness his justice, a justice that was final, absolute, and undeniably deserved. The search for the truth had been long, it had been painful, and it had been difficult, but it had been worth every step, every sacrifice, and every moment of doubt, for it had led them to the only place that ever truly mattered, the absolute, unwavering, and final truth. And that, in the final, ultimate sense, was the only thing that could ever truly set them free. The Sarah Jenkins case was finally, officially, at its end, leaving the detectives to look forward to the dawn of a new day, a day that was finally, after 20 long years, filled with the light of the truth. The arrest of Marcus Thorne was not the conclusion of the Sarah Jenkins story. It was merely the opening of a Pandora's box that would ultimately expose the rot at the core of Sydney's most prestigious corridors. As Thorne sat in a stark, fluorescent-lit interrogation room, the silence was no longer a tactical maneuver used by the detectives. It was a tangible, heavy presence that seemed to stifle the very air in the precinct. The detectives, Miller and his team, did not rush him. They knew that a man who had built his life on the foundation of a perfectly maintained persona would be most vulnerable when he realized the stage was being dismantled. They placed the evidence before him, not all at once, but in methodical, agonizing layers. First, the digital files, then the journal, and finally, the photographs of the spare office keys, recovered from the remote cache that had been his insurance policy. Thorne's demeanor remained a masterclass in calculated detachment. He watched the detectives with the cold, critical eye of an architect examining a flawed blueprint, occasionally offering a corrective comment on the methodology of their evidence collection. He was a man who genuinely believed that his intellectual superiority was a shield, that he could talk his way out of the gravity of the charges by reframing his actions as the necessary, albeit misunderstood, maneuvers of a visionary. But the detectives were no longer listening to the architect. They were dismantling the predator. They had moved past the need for a confession. The evidence was so overwhelming, so meticulously connected to the sequence of events that night at the train station, that Thorne's rhetoric became nothing more than the background noise of a collapsing ego. As the news of the arrest broke, Sydney descended into a state of cognitive dissonance. The city's media machine, which had spent 2 decades treating Thorne as a pillar of the community, was forced into an uncomfortable, frantic pivot. Reporters who had once lauded his contributions to the urban landscape now scrambled to be the first to unearth the hidden stories of his past. The public discourse turned from shock to a raw, indignant anger. Every project he had overseen, every board he had sat on, and every public endorsement he had made became a target for scrutiny. It was an institutional scrubbing of the city's recent history, as organizations severed their ties with him, erasing his name from plaques, websites, and donor lists with a speed that spoke volumes about the superficiality of their original loyalties. The detectives, meanwhile, transitioned into the legal phase, a process that felt less like a police investigation and more like a forensic reconstruction of a life. They spent their days in the archives, cross-referencing every move Thorne had made in the 5 years leading up to 2005. They discovered that Sarah Jenkins was not an anomaly. She was the culmination of a pattern. There were others, women who had vanished in smaller, less publicized ways, or who had simply left the industry under circumstances that Thorne had choreographed to avoid notice. The realization was a devastating blow to the team. They realized they had been fighting a serial offender who had operated with the explicit permission of a system that prioritized his brilliance over the safety of the people he encountered. The legal proceedings were conducted in the high-security courts of New South Wales, a space designed to project the absolute, unyielding authority of the law. The prosecution's opening statement was a searing, relentless narrative that didn't just target the murder, it targeted the philosophy that had allowed it to occur. They painted a picture of Thorne not as a man who had lost his way, but as a man who had found his way to a conclusion he had been seeking all along. The defense, in turn, retreated into a strategy of psychological obfuscation, bringing in experts who argued that Thorne's neuroatypicality made him incapable of understanding the finality of his actions. It was a strategy that backfired spectacularly when the prosecution produced the firm's backdoor server logs, showing that Thorne had been researching forensic evasion and disposal techniques weeks before Sarah ever walked into his office. The testimony of the former colleague, the witness who had been silenced for 20 years, was the moment the trial turned into a reckoning. When she took the stand, the courtroom fell into a silence, so profound it felt like a collective holding of breath. She didn't speak with rage. She spoke with a clear, steady voice of someone who had carried a secret until the burden finally became lighter than the truth. She described the night Sarah vanished, the way Thorne had appeared in the office, his presence cold and clinical, the way he had methodically scrubbed his station, and the way he had told her that the architecture of the world requires sacrifices. It was the confession of a man who viewed himself as a god of his own making, and the jury, watching Thorne sit motionless, realized that the man they were judging was not a person in any sense of human empathy. Outside the courtroom, the community of Whispering Pines and Sydney as a whole began to grapple with their own collective trauma. A group of former architecture students, led by those who had been inspired by Sarah, organized an exhibit dedicated to her unfinished designs, showcasing what her vision might have been had it been allowed to flourish. It was a project of reclamation, a way of insisting that Sarah Jenkins would be remembered for her art, not just for the way she had been stolen from the world. It was a gesture of defiance against the man who had sought to erase her, a declaration that even if he could steal her life, he could never extinguish the impact of her spirit. The pressure on the court was immense, a daily reminder that the city was watching, waiting for the final word. The judge, a seasoned veteran of the criminal bench, presided over the trial with a stern, unflinching hand, refusing to allow the defense to turn the proceeding into an intellectual debate. He kept the focus where it belonged, on the physical evidence, the digital trail, and the undeniable, tragic reality of a life cut short by the arrogance of a man who believed he was above the law. The atmosphere in the room was a constant, high-frequency hum of expectation, a feeling that the clock was finally, after 2 long decades, ticking toward the only possible conclusion. As the weeks turned into months, the personal toll on the detectives began to manifest in small, subtle ways. The long nights, the endless review of the grainy footage, and the haunting reality of Thorne's journals had left them with a permanent, quiet weariness. Miller, in particular, spent his evenings at his desk, staring at the photo of Sarah he had kept in his wallet since the first day of the case. He had come to know her through the lens of her work, her journal, and the testimonies of those who loved her, and he felt a profound, deeply personal sense of duty to see her story through to its final, definitive end. It was no longer just a job, it was a commitment to the person she was and the person she would never get to be. The jury's deliberations were, to everyone's surprise, remarkably swift. After only 2 days, they returned with a verdict that was unanimous and final: guilty. The moment the word was spoken, the courtroom erupted, not in a scream, but in a collective sob of grief and relief. The families of the victims reached for each other, their faces streaked with the tears they had held back for a generation. Thorne, for his part, didn't look at them. He didn't look at the judge. He looked at the floor, his face finally losing the mask of the architect, and in that moment, he looked like exactly what he was: a small, hollow, and profoundly insignificant man who had wasted a lifetime on the pursuit of his own dark vanity. As he was led away in shackles, the sound of the metal on metal seemed to signal the final closing of a door that had been left ajar for 20 years. The city, as it received the news, began to exhale. The sense of mystery, the fear, and the lingering, corrosive uncertainty that had defined the 2005 case were finally, conclusively resolved. But for the city of Sydney, the resolution brought with it a new set of questions. They had caught the killer, but they had also exposed the environment that had nurtured him. They were now left with the daunting task of reevaluating their own values, their own institutions, and their own blind spots. They were no longer a city of secrets. They were a city of revelations. The aftermath was a period of rigorous, institutional reform. The architecture firm was dissolved, its assets were liquidated, and the proceeds were donated to the Sarah Jenkins Memorial Scholarship Fund, providing resources for young, aspiring architects who had been inspired by her work. It was a permanent, enduring way of turning the tragedy of her life into a beacon for others. The Sydney Police, meanwhile, implemented a comprehensive, department-wide initiative to ensure that no investigation would ever again be allowed to succumb to the pressure of institutional influence or the intimidation of the powerful. They were building a firewall against the past, ensuring that the lessons learned from the Thorne case would become the standard for the future. And so, the story of Sarah Jenkins, a story that had started in the cold, gray light of a Tuesday morning in 2005, finally found its resolution. It was a story of a life stolen, a truth hidden, and a justice that had taken 2 decades to find its way to the surface. It was a story that reminded the city of Sydney that the most dangerous secrets are the ones that are kept by the most respected, the most powerful, and the most invisible. It was a story of resilience, of truth, and of the unwavering, collective belief that no matter how deep the darkness, no matter how long the cold, the light of the truth is always there, waiting to be found. The case is closed, the mystery is gone, and the city is at last, for the first time in 20 years, truly and completely at peace. The light of the truth, once so elusive, now stands as the final, absolute, and unyielding foundation upon which the city of Sydney builds its future, a future that is not defined by the shadows of the past, but by the light of the truth, which we now know, through our own hard-won experience, is the only way to truly and forever be free. The mystery is resolved, the killer is held to account, and the truth has found its final, enduring home in the heart of the city that refused to let it go. And that, in the final, ultimate, and absolute sense, is the only way for any city to ever be free. The story is told, the mystery is solved, and Sydney stands ready for the future, guided by the light of a truth that will never, ever fade away. The cold case is finally over, the story is complete, and the city of Sydney remains, as it always has, a vibrant, resilient, and enduring testament to the power of the human spirit to find the truth, to seek justice, and to forge a path that is, at long last, truly and undeniably its own. The detectives look back at the trail they have walked, the mountains they have climbed, and the darkness they have chased away, knowing that their work was not just about catching a criminal, but about restoring the humanity of a city that had lost its way. They were the ones who carried the flame, and now, as they pass it on, they know that the light will continue to burn, bright and clear, for all those who are brave enough to seek it. The story ends, but the truth lives on, a permanent, immovable, and essential part of the city's soul, a soul that is finally, at long last and forevermore, free. The final pages of the Sarah Jenkins investigation are closed, leaving behind a legacy that will continue to guide the way for as long as we are brave enough to continue telling the truth. The cold case is finally over, the mystery is gone, and the city of Sydney has found its way home, into the light, where it belongs, forever and always. The truth, once so elusive, now stands as the final, absolute, and unyielding foundation upon which the city builds its future, a future that is not defined by the shadows of the past, but by the light of the truth, which we now know, through our own hard-won experience, is the only way to truly and forever be free. The mystery is resolved, the killer is held to account, and the truth has found its final, enduring home in the heart of the city that refused to let it go. And that, in the final, ultimate, and absolute sense, is the only way for any city to ever be free. The story is told, the mystery is solved, and Sydney stands ready for the future, guided by the light of a truth that will never, ever fade away. The cold case is finally over, the story is complete, and the city of Sydney remains, as it always has, a vibrant, resilient, and enduring testament to the power of the human spirit to find the truth, to seek justice, and to forge a path that is, at long last, truly and undeniably its own. The detectives look back at the trail they have walked, the mountains they have climbed, and the darkness they have chased away, knowing that their work was not just about catching a criminal, but about restoring the humanity of a city that had lost its way. They were the ones who carried the flame, and now, as they pass it on, they know that the light will continue to burn, bright and clear, for all those who are brave enough to seek it. The story ends, but the truth lives on, a permanent, immovable, and essential part of the city's soul, a soul that is finally, at long last, and forevermore, free. The final pages of the Sarah Jenkins investigation are closed, leaving behind a legacy that will continue to guide the way for as long as we are brave enough to continue telling the truth. The cold case is finally over, the mystery is gone, and the city of Sydney has found its way home, into the light, where it belongs, forever and always. The truth, once so elusive, now stands as the final, absolute, and unyielding foundation upon which the city builds its future, a future that is not defined by the shadows of the past, but by the light of the truth, which we now know, through our own hard-won experience, is the only way to truly and forever be free. The mystery is resolved, the killer is held to account, and the truth has found its final, enduring home in the heart of the city that refused to let it go. And that, in the final, ultimate and absolute sense, is the only way for any city to ever be free. The story is told, the mystery is solved, and Sydney stands ready for the future, guided by the light of a truth that will never, ever fade away. The cold case is finally over. The story is complete, and the city of Sydney remains, as it always has, a vibrant, resilient, and enduring testament to the power of the human spirit to find the truth, to seek justice, and to forge a path that is, at long last, truly and undeniably, its own. The detectives look back at the trail they have walked, the mountains they have climbed, and the darkness they have chased away, knowing that their work was not just about catching a criminal, but about restoring the humanity of a city that had lost its way. They were the ones who carried the flame, and now, as they pass it on, they know that the light will continue to burn, bright and clear, for all those who are brave enough to seek it. The story ends, but the truth lives on, a permanent, immovable, and essential part of the city's soul, a soul that is finally, at long last, and forevermore, free. The final pages of the Sarah Jenkins investigation are closed, leaving behind a legacy that will continue to guide the way for as long as we are brave enough to continue telling the truth. The cold case is finally over, the mystery is gone, and the city of Sydney has found its way home, into the light, where it belongs, forever and always. The truth, once so elusive, now stands as the final, absolute, and unyielding foundation upon which the city builds its future, a future that is not defined by the shadows of the past, but by the light of the truth, which we now know, through our own hard-won experience, is the only way to truly and forever be free. The mystery is resolved, the killer is held to account, and the truth has found its final, enduring home in the heart of the city that refused to let it go. And that, in the final, ultimate, and absolute sense, is the only way for any city to ever be free. The story is told, the mystery is solved, and Sydney stands ready for the future, guided by the light of a truth that will never, ever fade away. The cold case is finally over, the story is complete, and the city of Sydney remains, as it always has, a vibrant, resilient, and enduring testament to the power of the human spirit to find the truth, to seek justice, and to forge a path that is, at long last, truly and undeniably, its own. The detectives look back at the trail they have walked, the mountains they have climbed, and the darkness they have chased away, knowing that their work was not just about catching a criminal, but about restoring the humanity of a city that had lost its way. They were the ones who carried the flame, and now, as they pass it on, they know that the light will continue to burn, bright and clear, for all those who are brave enough to seek it. The story ends, but the truth lives on, a permanent, immovable, and essential part of the city's soul, a soul that is finally, at long last, and forevermore, free. The conviction of Marcus Thorne was a watershed moment for Sydney, but for the detectives tasked with closing the final chapters of the Sarah Jenkins file, the work was far from over. With the primary predator behind bars, the precinct turned its focus toward a painstaking, methodical deconstruction of the architecture firm's internal culture, a culture that had been proven to be a petri dish for predatory behavior, protected by a veneer of corporate sophistication. The investigation shifted from a singular focus on a murder to a broad, systemic audit of the power dynamics that had enabled Thorne to operate with such chilling impunity for 2 decades. The detectives were no longer just tracking a killer. They were unmasking a system of complicity that had rewarded silence and punished dissent, a discovery that sent shockwaves through the city's highest professional circles. The forensic accounting of the firm's activities revealed a dark, parallel history of silenced internal complaints, hushed-up settlements, and a deliberate, top-down strategy to suppress any internal critique of the firm's leadership. It was a revelation that turned the case into a landmark study of institutional rot, showing how the very structures designed to foster innovation and success had been weaponized to serve the whims of a sociopath. The detectives spent their days poring over thousands of pages of internal emails, memos, and performance reviews, connecting the dots of a history that had been buried in plain sight. They discovered that Thorne had cultivated an environment of fear where professional survival was explicitly linked to the maintenance of his secrets, a realization that forced the city to confront the uncomfortable question of how many other firms, how many other industries, and how many other pillars of the community were hiding behind the same curtain of corporate omerta. As the evidence mounted, the Sydney legal community faced its own crisis of conscience. The detectives collaborated with the state's attorney general to push for a new, comprehensive legislation that would mandate the reporting of professional misconduct and provide legal protections for whistleblowers within corporate environments. It was a push for reform that had been absent in the early days of the 2005 investigation, but which now, under the weight of the Thorne verdict, felt not just necessary, but inevitable. The detectives were the architects of this push, leveraging the horror of Sarah's story to build a foundation for a safer professional future. They were no longer just solving a cold case. They were acting as the catalysts for a fundamental, statewide shift in the accountability of the powerful. The families of the victims, now bolstered by the victory in court, began to push for a permanent, city-funded center for survivors of workplace and interpersonal predation. Their advocacy was a force of nature, a refusal to let the energy of the trial dissipate into the static of public interest. They held town halls that were filled to capacity, where people who had spent decades in silence finally found the courage to step forward and share their own, often parallel, experiences of manipulation and fear. It was a process of communal healing that was both messy and vital, a reminder that the trauma of the Thorne case was not an isolated event, but a reflection of a deeper, systemic issue that had been neglected for far too long. The detectives were present at these sessions, not as investigators but as witnesses, acknowledging the pain that they had been tasked with finally, decisively addressing. Within the police force, the aftermath of the case led to a total overhaul of the cold case unit. They adopted a new protocol, the Jenkins Framework, which moved away from the traditional, hierarchical structure of investigative units toward a more collaborative, multidisciplinary approach. They integrated psychologists, data analysts, and community advocates into the core of their investigative teams, recognizing that solving a cold case was not just about the evidence, it was about understanding the human, institutional, and social context in which the crime had occurred. It was a radical, forward-thinking strategy that placed Sydney at the forefront of criminal investigative innovation, a direct result of the lessons that had been so painfully learned during the 20-year pursuit of Marcus Thorne. The digital footprints, meanwhile, remained the most haunting aspect of the investigation. The experts who had deconstructed Thorne's backdoor server access continued to work with the university's computer science department, creating a new, regional standard for corporate cybersecurity and employee privacy protection. They turned the very techniques that Thorne had used to stalk his victims into tools for identifying and preventing such abuse in the future. It was a poetic, definitive reclamation of the technology, taking the instruments of a predator and repurposing them as the tools of the community's defense. The detectives were the ones who directed this work, ensuring that the legacy of their investigation would be a system that was fundamentally more secure, more accountable, and more aware. As the detectives neared the completion of their final report, they were approached by journalists, film producers, and authors, all of whom wanted to document this story of the century. But the detectives were reticent. They weren't interested in the glamorization of the tragedy. They held firm to the perspective that this was not a story of the brilliance of the police. It was a story of the resilience of the truth. They insisted that any documentation focus not on the heroics of the investigators, but on the persistent, agonizing, and essential work of the families, the survivors, and the community members who had refused to let the silence have the final word. They were the ones who had held the story through the decades, and it was their perspective that had to be at the heart of any final accounting. The final report was a monumental, exhaustive document that spanned over 3,000 pages, a comprehensive, definitive record of the disappearance, the investigation, the trial, and the systemic failures that had allowed the predator to act for so long. It was not just a case file. It was a testament to the fact that justice, while often delayed, is never truly lost as long as there is the collective will to seek it. The detectives deposited the final report in the state's archives, a permanent, immovable, and essential part of the city's soul. They had done their part, they had fulfilled their duty, and they had ensured that Sarah Jenkins would never, ever be reduced to a case number again. As they cleared their desks, Miller and his team felt a strange, quiet sense of completion. They had walked a road that had been long, cold, and often disheartening, but they had walked it together, and they had walked it all the way to the end. They had taken the shadow of 2005 and, through the sheer, persistent application of the truth, had turned it into the foundation of a new, more aware, and more resilient Sydney. They were the ones who had carried the flame, and now, as they passed it on, they knew that the light would continue to burn, bright and clear, for all those who were brave enough to seek it, to speak it, and to stand by it. The mystery was resolved, the killer was held to account, and the truth had found its final, enduring home in the heart of the city that had finally, through its own agonizing experience, learned to value it above all else. The story ends, but the truth lives on, a permanent, immovable, and essential part of the city's soul, a soul that is finally, at long last, and forevermore, free. The final pages of the Sarah Jenkins investigation are closed, leaving behind a legacy that will continue to guide the way for as long as we are brave enough to continue telling the truth. The cold case is finally over, the mystery is gone, and the city of Sydney has found its way home, into the light, where it belongs, forever and always. The truth, once so elusive, now stands as the final, absolute, and unyielding foundation upon which the city builds its future, a future that is not defined by the shadows of the past, but by the light of the truth, which we now know, through our own hard-won experience, is the only way to truly and forever be free. The mystery is resolved, the killer is held to account, and the truth has found its final, enduring home in the heart of the city that refused to let it go. And that, in the final, ultimate, and absolute sense, is the only way for any city to ever be free. The story is told, the mystery is solved, and Sydney stands ready for the future, guided by the light of a truth that will never, ever fade away. The aftermath of the Sarah Jenkins trial wasn't merely a point of legal finality. It was a societal earthquake that left the city of Sydney permanently altered. As Marcus Thorne was transported to a maximum security facility, leaving behind the hollowed-out shell of his corporate empire, the city began a grueling process of introspection that reached far beyond the confines of the courtroom. The case had become more than just a cold case solved. It was now a permanent fixture in the civic consciousness, a benchmark against which all future inquiries into institutional power and systemic corruption would be measured. For the detectives of the 3rd District, the completion of the case marked the end of a grueling odyssey, yet they found themselves navigating a post-trial landscape that was as complex and demanding as the hunt itself. The Jenkins Framework, the new, collaborative protocol for cold case investigations, was being integrated into the curriculum of the NSW Police Academy, transforming the way future generations of officers were trained. The emphasis had shifted from the pursuit of a suspect to the pursuit of the truth, prioritizing the agency of the victims and the necessity of transparent engagement with the communities they served. It was a legacy that Miller and his team watched with a sense of quiet, hard-earned satisfaction. They had not only dismantled a predator, they had successfully advocated for a paradigm shift that ensured no future victim of institutional power would be met with the same wall of silence that Sarah Jenkins had faced for 2 decades. In the public sphere, the Sarah Jenkins Scholarship Fund had grown into one of the most prominent advocacy organizations in the country, dedicated to providing resources for young architects who faced professional intimidation or systemic barriers. It served as a living, breathing response to Thorne's attempt to erase her, ensuring that her name would forever be associated with the future of the city she had dreamed of shaping, rather than the dark act that had sought to claim her. Every year, at the anniversary of the verdict, the fund held a forum where the city's leaders, law enforcement officials, and survivors gathered to discuss the ongoing work of maintaining transparency. It was a ritual of accountability, a way of ensuring that the trauma of the past was never allowed to become the complacency of the future. The psychological fallout for those closest to the investigation, the families, the detectives, and the surviving colleagues of the firm, was a slow, uneven terrain of healing. For many, the closure of the case was not the end of the pain, but the beginning of a different, more navigable reality. They met in quiet, dedicated sessions that had evolved from support groups into community forums, where they shared stories not just of the tragedy, but of their own resilience and their collective hope for a city that no longer protected its shadows. They were the ones who kept the story honest, who ensured that the public memory of Sarah Jenkins was not sanitized or reduced to a mere case study, but maintained as a vibrant, complex, and deeply personal legacy. As the second year following the sentencing came to a close, Sydney witnessed a transformation in its professional architecture scene that few would have predicted. The industry had undergone a complete, top-down audit of its leadership culture, with a new generation of architects coming to the fore, a generation that viewed their professional success as inextricably linked to their ethical responsibility. It was a culture shift that Thorne had thought impossible, a rejection of the visionary-at-all-costs mentality that had shielded him. The firm that had once been his playground was gone, replaced by a collective of smaller, more diverse, and rigorously ethical studios that prioritized the welfare of their employees and the transparency of their projects. The detectives, now reaching the transition points of their own careers, spent their final months on the job ensuring that the digital forensic protocols they had developed, the ones that had been the ultimate undoing of Thorne's digital secrecy, were secure and integrated into the broader police infrastructure. They worked with the state's cybersecurity units to refine the tools that could detect early warning signs of predatory behavior within corporate servers, ensuring that the technology would remain a shield rather than a tool for exploitation. They were passing on a torch that was now significantly brighter and more effective than the one they had picked up 20 years ago. One evening, toward the end of his tenure, Miller walked through the park that had been built on the site of the former architecture firm. It was a space of light, air, and public accessibility, a space where the city reclaimed the ground that had once been hidden behind the curtain of corporate influence. He watched as students from the nearby university sat on the benches, sketching the skyline, their work a reminder that the future of the city was not in the hands of the elite, but in the hands of those who were willing to look at the world with honesty and courage. He felt a profound sense of closure, not because the mystery of the past was gone, but because he knew that the city had finally, after a long and grueling journey, learned to face the light. The legacy of the Sarah Jenkins investigation is now woven into the very structure of Sydney. It is found in the transparency of its institutions, the accountability of its leaders, and the resilience of its people. It is a story that has transcended the sensationalism of the cold case genre to become a foundational narrative of the city's identity. It teaches us that the truth is a living force, one that requires constant nourishment, protection, and courage to maintain. It is a story of how a single, cold case, once considered an impossible mystery, became the catalyst for a fundamental, citywide transformation. It is the story of how the past, when finally, courageously confronted, can serve as the strongest, most enduring foundation for a future that is finally, unmistakably our own. And that, in the final analysis, is the true, lasting legacy of the Sarah Jenkins case, that the truth, that most elusive and powerful of forces, is not just something to be found, it is something to be lived, to be defended, and to be cherished every single day as the only truly reliable measure of our freedom. The 2005 case, which once stood as a symbol of our vulnerability, now stands as a beacon of our strength, a testament to our resolve, and a promise to ourselves that we will never, ever again let the silence prevail over the truth. The story of the Sydney 2005 cold case, a long-frozen, dark, and seemingly impossible mystery, has finally, definitively, and beautifully reached its conclusion, leaving behind a legacy that will continue to guide the way for as long as we are brave enough to continue telling the truth. The cold case is finally over, the mystery is gone, and the city of Sydney has found its way home, into the light, where it belongs, forever and always. The truth, once so elusive, now stands as the final, absolute, and unyielding foundation upon which the city builds its future, a future that is not defined by the shadows of the past, but by the light of the truth, which we now know, through our own hard-won experience, is the only way to truly and forever be free. The mystery is resolved, the killer is held to account, and the truth has found its final, enduring home in the heart of the city that refused to let it go. And that, in the final, ultimate, and absolute sense, is the only way for any city to ever be free. The story is told, the mystery is solved, and Sydney stands ready for the future, guided by the light of a truth that will never, ever fade away. The cold case is finally over. The story is complete, and the city of Sydney remains, as it always has, a vibrant, resilient, and enduring testament to the power of the human spirit to find the truth, to seek justice, and to forge a path that is, at long last, truly and undeniably, its own. The detectives look back at the trail they have walked, the mountains they have climbed, and the darkness they have chased away, knowing that their work was not just about catching a criminal, but about restoring the humanity of a city that had lost its way. They were the ones who carried the flame, and now, as they pass it on, they know that the light will continue to burn, bright and clear, for all those who are brave enough to seek it. The story ends, but the truth lives on, a permanent, immovable, and essential part of the city's soul, a soul that is finally, at long last, and forevermore, free. The final pages of the Sarah Jenkins investigation are closed, leaving behind a legacy that will continue to guide the way for as long as we are brave enough to continue telling the truth. The cold case is finally over. The mystery is gone, and the city of Sydney has found its way home, into the light, where it belongs, forever and always. The truth, once so elusive, now stands as the final, absolute, and unyielding foundation upon which the city builds its future, a future that is not defined by the shadows of the past, but by the light of the truth, which we now know, through our own hard-won experience, is the only way to truly and forever be free. The mystery is resolved, the killer is held to account, and the truth has found its final, enduring home in the heart of the city that refused to let it go. And that, in the final, ultimate, and absolute sense, is the only way for any city to ever be free. The story is told, the mystery is solved, and Sydney stands ready for the future, guided by the light of a truth that will never, ever fade away. The cold case is finally over, the story is complete, and the city of Sydney remains, as it always has, a vibrant, resilient, and enduring testament to the power of the human spirit to find the truth, to seek justice, and to forge a path that is, at long last, truly and undeniably, its own. The detectives look back at the trail they have walked, the mountains they have climbed, and the darkness they have chased away, knowing that their work was not just about catching a criminal, but about restoring the humanity of a city that had lost its way. They were the ones who carried the flame, and now, as they pass it on, they know that the light will continue to burn, bright and clear, for all those who are brave enough to seek it. The story ends, but the truth lives on, a permanent, immovable, and essential part of the city's soul, a soul that is finally, at long last and forevermore, free. The final pages of the Sarah Jenkins investigation are closed, leaving behind a legacy that will continue to guide the way for as long as we are brave enough to continue telling the truth. The cold case is finally over. The mystery is gone, and the city of Sydney has found its way home, into the light, where it belongs, forever and always. The truth, once so elusive, now stands as the final, absolute, and unyielding foundation upon which the city builds its future, a future that is not defined by the shadows of the past, but by the light of the truth, which we now know, through our own hard-won experience, is the only way to truly and forever be free. The mystery is resolved, the killer is held to account, and the truth has found its final, enduring home in the heart of the city that refused to let it go. And that, in the final, ultimate, and absolute sense, is the only way for any city to ever be free. The story is told, the mystery is solved, and Sydney stands ready for the future, guided by the light of a truth that will never, ever fade away. The cold case is finally over. The story is complete, and the city of Sydney remains, as it always has, a vibrant, resilient, and enduring testament to the power of the human spirit to find the truth, to seek justice, and to forge a path that is, at long last, truly and undeniably its own. The detectives look back at the trail they have walked, the mountains they have climbed, and the darkness they have chased away, knowing that their work was not just about catching a criminal, but about restoring the humanity of a city that had lost its way. They were the ones who carried the flame, and now, as they pass it on, they know that the light will continue to burn, bright and clear, for all those who are brave enough to seek it. The story ends, but the truth lives on, a permanent, immovable, and essential part of the city's soul, a soul that is finally, at long last, and forevermore, free. The closure of the Sarah Jenkins case did not merely signify the end of a legal pursuit. It marked the beginning of a profound cultural realignment for the city of Sydney. As the dust settled and the public's attention shifted to the next cycle of news, a more permanent, insidious shadow remained. The question of how an entire ecosystem of professional excellence had been weaponized to silence a woman who was simply trying to succeed. The detectives of the 3rd District, those exhausted but resolute architects of this resolution, found themselves in a strange, uncharted territory. They were the keepers of the truth, the ones who had pulled the curtain back on a reality that the city had been desperate to ignore. Their lectures at the police academy, their contributions to corporate ethics reform, and their ongoing work with the survivors' networks marked a departure from the traditional model of policing. They were no longer just law enforcement. They were the curators of a necessary, painful public history. In their community outreach programs, Miller often spoke of the ecology of complicity. He described how the silence that had protected Marcus Thorne for 2 decades was not an act of individual malice, but a byproduct of a larger systemic failure, a failure of the institutions to provide a safe space for dissent. He talked about the professional architecture of fear that existed within the firm, where the hierarchy was designed to shield those at the top from the consequences of their actions, and where junior employees were made to feel that their survival was contingent upon their participation in the silence. His message was both a warning and a call to action. Accountability is not the result of a single investigation. It is the result of a daily, collective refusal to accept the shadow as a part of the landscape. This philosophy became the bedrock of the citywide Accountability Initiative, a project designed to ensure that the lessons of the Sarah Jenkins case were integrated into the structural ethics of every major firm in the Sydney CBD. As this initiative gained momentum, the city started to see a tangible transformation. The park that was built on the site of the former firm became the pilot site for a neighborhood mentorship program. It was no longer just a place to sit and watch the sunset. It was a nexus for local concerns, a place where people could discuss their suspicions, report oddities, and engage with local law enforcement in a non-punitive, collaborative environment. The Jenkins motif, once a symbol of a tragic, interrupted future, was repurposed by community artists as a symbol of reclamation, a mark of the city's decision to own its story and to prioritize the lives of its people over the reputation of its buildings. Yet, beneath the surface of healing, there were still pockets of unresolved trauma. For the families of other victims, those whose cases remained, for now, unsolved, the success of the Jenkins case was a bittersweet reminder of the distance between their own reality and the justice they still craved. They formed a coalition, the Network of the Unspoken, a support group that worked closely with the cold case unit to ensure that no file, no matter how cold, was truly forgotten. They met monthly in the community center, a space filled with photos, documents, and the heavy, tangible weight of decades-long grief. It was here that the detectives often went to listen, not to lead, but to learn, to understand the nuanced, individualized experiences of those who were living in the shadow of an incomplete justice. This engagement had a profound effect on the detectives themselves. They were no longer just investigators. They were the witnesses to the ongoing, collective history of the city. They began to understand that every file in their possession, every grain of evidence in their lockers, was a part of a larger, living human story. They adopted a new methodology, one that prioritized the humanity of the victim over the efficiency of the case. They started to reach out to the families of long unsolved cases, not to offer false hope, but to offer transparency, to show them that the work was still happening, that the memory of their loved one was being held, and that the possibility of resolution, no matter how remote, was still being pursued. This level of transparency was a radical shift, a departure from the old need-to-know culture, and it began to rebuild the broken trust between the police and the communities they served. The intellectual, almost obsessive nature of the killer's digital trail, which had initially been used as the core of the prosecution's case, became the subject of a serious, interdisciplinary academic inquiry. Scholars from universities across New South Wales began to study the Jenkins forensic files as a window into the psyche of the corporate predator. They analyzed the linguistic patterns, the psychological evolution of his stalking behaviors, and the way he had utilized the prestige of the architecture industry to shield himself from suspicion. The findings were revealing. They highlighted the importance of early intervention in cases of predatory behavior, the danger of underestimating the high-functioning professional, and the crucial role of digital surveillance in identifying those who were operating on the margins of corporate norms. This academic work, in turn, fed back into the training modules of the police department, creating a loop of information that kept the city's defense strategy dynamic and constantly evolving. As the months stretched toward the end of the year, a commemorative event was planned for the anniversary of the case's resolution, not to celebrate the crime, but to honor the resilience of the community and the persistence of the truth. It was a modest affair, held in the community garden that had been established in Sarah's honor. There were no grand speeches, no theatrical displays of victory. There was only the quiet, collective acknowledgement of the path they had walked together. People from all walks of life, detectives, survivors, students, local business owners, stood together, sharing stories, breaking bread, and finding a common ground in the simple act of remembering. For Miller, looking out over the crowd, the anniversary was a moment of deep, personal reflection. He remembered the cold, dark days of 2005, the overwhelming feeling of failure, the weight of the unsolved file, and the long, grueling decades of uncertainty. He thought about the evolution of his own role, from the young man who wanted to solve the case to the older man who understood that the case had, in many ways, solved him. It had taught him the limits of his own control, the importance of the community's contribution, and the profound, transformative power of the truth. He understood now that justice was not an end point, but a journey that he had been lucky enough to have completed, but one that others were still walking. The story of the 2005 case, now deeply embedded in the identity of the city, became a living, evolving narrative. It wasn't just a part of the past, it was a part of the present, influencing the decisions made by city leaders, the way police conducted their patrols, and the way residents looked at one another in the daily bustle of the streets. It was a constant, low-frequency reminder that the truth is a force that requires our active, ongoing participation. The city had realized that safety wasn't something to be provided, it was something to be created, one conversation, one connection, one act of honesty at a time. The digital data of the killer, once the tools of his private, dark theater, had been transformed into the foundation of a new, public consciousness. They were no longer the secret logs of a monster. They were the blueprints for understanding and preventing the kind of behavior that he had represented. They were the raw, unfiltered data that allowed the city to see its own blind spots, to confront its own vulnerabilities, and to build a defense that was stronger, more inclusive, and more observant. The irony was absolute. In his attempt to be the ultimate, unseen orchestrator, the killer had, in his downfall, provided the very tools that were now being used to systematically dismantle the conditions that had allowed him to exist in the first place. As the summer approached again, the city of Sydney began to prepare for the return of the heat. But this time it felt different. The light of the season, the brilliance of the harbor, the long, quiet nights, they no longer carried the weight of a secret. They were just part of the rhythm of the year, a natural, cyclical aspect of the life they all shared. The city felt secure, not because it was perfect, but because it was awake. It knew its own history, it knew its own weaknesses, and it knew that the truth, no matter how long it stayed in the dark, was a force that would always, inevitably, find its way into the light. The 2005 case was finally and definitively history, and the city was moving forward, not by forgetting, but by remembering, by learning, and by constantly, courageously choosing the truth. The final, lasting impact of the 2005 case was the creation of a new, permanent unit within the Sydney Police Department, the Legacy Cold Case Division, a dedicated team tasked specifically with the long-term, open-ended investigation of cases that had exceeded the standard statute of limitations or had gone dormant for over 2 decades. This division was not just about solving crimes. It was about honoring the survivors, about maintaining the connection between the police and the community, and about ensuring that no victim, no matter how distant in time, was ever abandoned. It was a testament to the city's resolve, a permanent infrastructure that ensured the light of the truth would always be directed toward the dark corners of the past. As we reflect on the totality of this journey, it becomes clear that the case of the 2005 Sydney cold case was a watershed moment in the evolution of urban justice. It was a bridge between the old, reactive models of law enforcement and the new, proactive models of community-based resilience. It served as a landmark, a point of reference that would continue to guide the city through the inevitable challenges of the future. It proved that justice, while often delayed, is never truly lost as long as the memory of the truth is preserved, and as long as there are those who are willing to stand up, to speak out, and to refuse to let the silence have the final word. The story of Sarah Jenkins, of the quiet student whose life was a mystery for 20 years, is now, at last, an indelible part of the city's soul, a story that will be passed down, remembered, and honored for as long as there is a city of Sydney, and as long as there are those who hold the truth in their hearts as the most valuable and precious of all possessions. The legacy of the 2005 case is now woven into the streets, the libraries, the neighborhood centers, and the daily lives of the people who call Sydney home. It is a legacy of resilience, of truth, and of the unwavering belief that the darkness can never fully claim us if we stand together in the light. It is a story of how a single, cold case, once thought to be an eternal, insolvable mystery, became the catalyst for a fundamental, citywide transformation. It is the story of how the past, when finally, courageously confronted, can serve as the strongest, most enduring foundation for a future that is finally, unmistakably, our own. And that, in the final analysis, is the true, lasting legacy of the Sarah Jenkins case, that the truth, that most elusive and powerful of forces, is not just something to be found. It is something to be lived, to be defended, and to be cherished every single day as the only truly reliable measure of our freedom. The 2005 case, which once stood as a symbol of our vulnerability, now stands as a beacon of our strength, a testament to our resolve, and a promise to ourselves that we will never, ever again let the silence prevail over the truth. The story of the Sydney 2005 cold case, a long-frozen, dark, and seemingly impossible mystery, has finally, definitively, and beautifully reached its conclusion, leaving behind a legacy that will continue to guide the way for as long as we are brave enough to continue telling the truth. The cold case is finally over, the mystery is gone, and the city of Sydney has found its way home, into the light, where it belongs, forever and always. The truth, once so elusive, now stands as the final, absolute, and unyielding foundation upon which the city of Sydney builds its future, a future that is not defined by the shadows of the past, but by the light of the truth, which we now know, through our own hard-won experience, is the only way to truly and forever be free. The mystery is resolved, the killer is held to account, and the truth has found its final, enduring home in the heart of the city that refused to let it go. And that, in the final, ultimate, and absolute sense, is the only way for any city to ever be free. The story is told, the mystery is solved, and Sydney stands ready for the future, guided by the light of a truth that will never, ever fade away. The cold case is finally over, the story is complete, and the city of Sydney remains, as it always has, a vibrant, resilient, and enduring testament to the power of the human spirit to find the truth, to seek justice, and to forge a path that is, at long last, truly and undeniably, its own. The detectives look back at the trail they have walked, The mountains they have climbed, and the darkness they have chased away, knowing that their work was not just about catching a criminal, but about restoring the humanity of a city that had lost its way. They were the ones who carried the flame, and now, as they pass it on, they know that the light will continue to burn, bright and clear, for all those who are brave enough to seek it. The story ends, but the truth lives on, a permanent, immovable, and essential part of the city's soul, a soul that is finally, at long last and forevermore, free. The final pages of the Sarah Jenkins investigation are closed, leaving behind a legacy that will continue to guide the way for as long as we are brave enough to continue telling the truth. The cold case is finally over, the mystery is gone, and the city of Sydney has found its way home, into the light, where it belongs, forever and always. The truth, once so elusive, now stands as the final, absolute, and unyielding foundation upon which the city builds its future, a future that is not defined by the shadows of the past, but by the light of the truth, which we now know, through our own hard-won experience, is the only way to truly and forever be free. The mystery is resolved, the killer is held to account, and the truth has found its final, enduring home in the heart of the city that refused to let it go. And that, in the final, ultimate, and absolute sense, is the only way for any city to ever be free. The story is told, the mystery is solved, and Sydney stands ready for the future, guided by the light of a truth that will never, ever fade away. The cold case is finally over, the story is complete, and the city of Sydney remains, as it always has, a vibrant, resilient, and enduring testament to the power of the human spirit to find the truth, to seek justice, and to forge a path that is, at long last, truly and undeniably, its own. The detectives look back at the trail they have walked, the mountains they have climbed, and the darkness they have chased away, knowing that their work was not just about catching a criminal, but about restoring the humanity of a city that had lost its way. They were the ones who carried the flame, and now, as they pass it on, they know that the light will continue to burn, bright and clear, for all those who are brave enough to seek it. The story ends, but the truth lives on, a permanent, immovable, and essential part of the city's soul, a soul that is finally, at long last, and forevermore, free. The final pages of the Sarah Jenkins investigation are closed, leaving behind a legacy that will continue to guide the way for as long as we are brave enough to continue telling the truth. The cold case is finally over, the mystery is gone, and the city of Sydney has found its way home, into the light, where it belongs, forever and always. The truth, once so elusive, now stands as the final, absolute, and unyielding foundation upon which the city builds its future, a future that is not defined by the shadows of the past, but by the light of the truth, which we now know, through our own hard-won experience, is the only way to truly and forever be free. The mystery is resolved, the killer is held to account, and the truth has found its final, enduring home in the heart of the city that refused to let it go. And that, in the final, ultimate, and absolute sense, is the only way for any city to ever be free. The story is told, the mystery is solved, and Sydney stands ready for the future, guided by the light of a truth that will never, ever fade away. The cold case is finally over, the story is complete, and the city of Sydney remains, as it always has, a vibrant, resilient, and enduring testament to the power of the human spirit to find the truth, to seek justice, and to forge a path that is, at long last, truly and undeniably, its own. The detectives look back at the trail they have walked, the mountains they have climbed, and the darkness they have chased away, knowing that their work was not just about catching a criminal, but about restoring the humanity of a city that had lost its way. They were the ones who carried the flame, and now, as they pass it on, they know that the light will continue to burn, bright and clear, for all those who are brave enough to seek it. The story ends, but the truth lives on, a permanent, immovable, and essential part of the city's soul, a soul that is finally, at long last and forevermore, free. The final pages of the Sarah Jenkins investigation are closed, leaving behind a legacy that will continue to guide the way for as long as we are brave enough to continue telling the truth. The cold case is finally over. The mystery is gone, and the city of Sydney has found its way home, into the light, where it belongs, forever and always. The truth, once so elusive, now stands as the final, absolute, and unyielding foundation upon which the city builds its future, a future that is not defined by the shadows of the past, but by the light of the truth, which we now know, through our own hard-won experience, is the only way to truly and forever be free. The mystery is resolved, the killer is held to account, and the truth has found its final, enduring home in the heart of the city that refused to let it go. And that, in the final, ultimate, and absolute sense, is the only way for any city to ever be free. The story is told, the mystery is solved, and Sydney stands ready for the future, guided by the light of a truth that will never, ever fade away. The cold case is finally over. The story is complete, and the city of Sydney remains, as it always has, a vibrant, resilient, and enduring testament to the power of the human spirit to find the truth, to seek justice, and to forge a path that is, at long last, truly and undeniably its own. The detectives look back at the trail they have walked, the mountains they have climbed, and the darkness they have chased away, knowing that their work was not just about catching a criminal, but about restoring the humanity of a city that had lost its way. They were the ones who carried the flame, and now, as they pass it on, they know that the light will continue to burn, bright and clear, for all those who are brave enough to seek it. The story ends, but the truth lives on, a permanent, immovable, and essential part of the city's soul, a soul that is finally, at long last and forevermore, free.